It's textile art or art quilting as opposed to quilting that's used for beds and utilitarian. So the basis of it is a lot on quilting, but it uses a lot of painting and photography and so on. A friend of mine who does photo-based fabric work calls hers fibrography, which I kind of like because it's a combination of the photography and fiber. But I come from a painting and graphic design background and have always done a lot of sewing. And so this was just sort of a great way to put sort of all those different things together in one art form. It's a strange art form because there's a lot of people who do it that don't have an art background. They came to it from a more traditional sewing background. And there's a lot of artists who don't consider textiles necessarily a true art form. So we're kind of in the gray area of life. Oh, it's just that traditional craft versus art argument that you hear all the time. And yeah, it's, you know, when I was a kid, one of the first things I did as an artist was I was in an art fair many, many years ago, and there was a potter on one side of me and a wood carver on the other side. And during the course of the show, the wood carver told me that they shouldn't have let the potter in because that wasn't really art. I think that art is a craft and craft is an art. I really don't see anything, and I think we're all just makers. Yeah. And whether it's considered art or craft boils down to the marketing of it more than the making of it. So that's, I just leave it as I'm a maker, and if people want to say it's artist, great. If people want to say it's crafter, great. I don't really, that doesn't affect me. Mostly because I was a graphic designer for years, and those are the ultimate prostitutes of art, so. This is what I'm doing now is called free motion stitching. And what it is it's almost the opposite of drawing in the sense of when you draw, you move your hand and you move the pencil over the paper. But with free motion stitching, you actually move the paper under the implement. So I'm actually drawing with the needle in many ways, and I can make straight lines or circles or rounds or whatever I want to make within it to get whatever texture I want. A lot of things go into making the texture, how closely you stitch or how many layers are in the stitching or what form the stitching takes or the length of the stitch or the weight of the thread. It's all different. It's a lot the same as a painter's brush stroke. You know, what each stroke can be different. Yeah, like I said, I was a graphic designer for a lot of years. I originally was in fine art school and decided I didn't want to starve in a garret and went to work as a banker for a while. And decided then when I saw someone from an advertising agency come in that there were people who were doing creative advertising and getting money for it. So I went to work in the advertising field and did a lot of photography direction, not taking photography, but that, and was sewing on the side. So when I retired from the corporate world, I had been working my whole life doing solving problems and doing design for other people. I said, this is my time now where I can do exactly what I want to do. So I don't do any commissions. I don't do anything other than my own work. So like brushes, a fiber artist has a ton of different feet for their, that help them do different stitches and different types of stitching on the computer, or on the sewing machine. So the one I was using before was for the free motion, and this one you can see it's almost like a ruler. So if I want to make lines, I can sort of judge where the line's going to be. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, was the design in your, because they know the sewing machine has a computer in it. And so they think somehow the computer knows where to do all this stuff, but it's all by hand. And so another thing is, with all the fabrics, are my paints, and the threads are my paints. So you can see where, for instance, like with this one, these are all the threads that I plan on using on this piece, plus some others. But so I go ahead and sort of audition all the threads to see who's worthy of being in this one. First, I have to pick out a photo that I want to do. And I get that photo printed on fabric, and I can show you a piece where it's just the fabric with the photo on it. And so that is the first color decision of, you know, the photography. And then after that, it's like, what colors do I want to add, enhance, or subdue that are on the actual photo? So then I can do that with, with either the thread, if I want just a subtle shift of color, or a transparent fabric, which I use a lot of, like organzas or tools like that are transparent, or I can do it with completely cover parts of the photo with an opaque other fabrics. I take the photograph of what I saw, but the finished piece is how I saw it. And I think, you know, like the one over here to your right, that one, for instance, was at Union Station in Washington, D.C. And I just loved the light, but I also wanted to get all this textural feeling and stuff to it. Most every day I take some photos, but probably 1 in every 1,000 get to actually become a quilt. Because sometimes the photos are just fine the way they are, and they don't need a quilt. They don't need the texture, and sometimes they do. There is the back. There is the an underlying fabric in the middle. There's the photo fabric, and then I added this other color fabric, and then there are organza. So there's all those different layers through, so I can cut through to whatever color I want to show through. So a lot of these here, then I will go through and maybe add either a light or dark thread with some hand sewn stitching also to bring in yet another kind of texture or another kind of color to them. My real love is oil painting, but oil paints are so toxic. And I tend to, when I oil paint, I tend to get my hands in it because I just love the tactileness. And that's one of the things I like best about this work, is that I'm literally caressing and working with my hands almost like you would be a potter or something like that with this, because it's so hands-on and so intimate. And I think I really like that, especially after working in graphic design, which is all computer for so long, that just to be back where I actually feel like I'm really part of what I'm making is important to me. One of the hard parts too is keeping, because there's so many layers of fabric, to keep all the fabrics from shifting like this when you're sewing. Right. And so that's why you see a lot of hand basting like this first. After I get the layers on, I'll hand baste them to just sort of make sure they all stay in nicely in a cohesive pack. I think all projects, I've laughed with some of my friends about this, that all projects have this sort of curve, that where you start a project and you're all excited and sort of know where you're going, and then you hit a point where I'll call the, oh crap, it's never going to work section. And you think, oh, this is never going to work. And then hopefully within a day or two it starts climbing back up. And then you know when you hit it at the end that it's going to be okay. But I've never had a project yet that hasn't had that oh crap start part in the middle. Majority of my stuff tends to be very earthy tones. My favorite colors are like one step off of gray or one step off of black, you know, like these here. I just love this stuff. And so that's really where my favorites are. Unfortunately, they're probably the hardest colors to find in fabric, and and in thread, because number one, they don't dye well at that low intensity, and also because most people want bright colors and fun colors and stuff, so it's sometimes hard to find what I really want to use. That's been one of the bad things with COVID, is there usually, at this time of year, are tons of expos, sewing expos and quilting expos and stuff, where vendors will come in from all over the world. And I'll pick up just tons of fabrics and threads and things that I can't find anywhere else. But unfortunately, because of COVID, those are not happening these days. And it's not easy to buy online, because obviously it's not easy to always tell what the colors are or what the feel of the fabric is online. And here's my paintbrushes. Ta-da! Yeah, I did art fairs for about, when I left the corporate world back in the horrible days of the downturn in the economy. And so I was doing reconstructed clothing for a while, where I would take sweaters and such that I would get at Goodwill and make new clothing out of it, and sold that at art fairs and art shows for about 7 years, when I really had to make an income from my art. Because these pieces here are fairly pricey, and also, you know, not everyone needs art for their walls. And so doing clothing, even in a depression, people buy clothing. So that was a much smarter move to do at that point in time. I've never been a photographer in the sense of that the photos are the final. The photos have always been sort of my sketchbook more, and just the recognition of what I see. I find an image and think, this image can be something, but I don't necessarily know what it'll be until I start working on it. So yeah, it's interesting to me because there are some phenomenal fiber artists that do work that is exquisitely planned and exquisitely specific, and you know, they'll do tons of preliminary drawings and sketchings and everything, and that's just not how my head works, and I can't do it. The other thing is I'm not at all interested in the minutia of technique. You know, like people will devise very specific techniques, or like a friend of mine who's a dyer, dyes fabrics from plants and things like that, and she keeps these impeccable records of the temperature of the water and where she got things, and just incredible technique. But I could never do that. It's the spontaneity of it all that I really enjoy.